Welcome everyone. Welcome to the 7th kind of annual, first online 350 Vermont annual Convergence. It's so nice to have you all here virtually, given that we can't be together this year, but it's so nice to see all your faces and nice to not have to travel in lousy weather. So we'll be, since it's a large group, we'll be asking people to stay on mute most of the time. If you are able to, please keep yourself on mute. And if you're able to, please keep your video on.
What?
It's so nice to see you all.
What? Mom.
Whoever's on the telephone, 9520043. I think you can mute yourself on the phone. I think it's *6, I believe. So we'll be using the chat a fair amount. If you are in the chat and you want to raise your hand, you can put an asterisk in the chat. And we'll see you hopefully. And if you agree with what somebody's saying, you can always add some plus signs in there, or with their name or with their comment, so that you're able to participate even though we can't hear your voice or maybe see your twinkle fingers. Great. So I'm going to start off. People are still joining us, and as people trickle in, feel free to find your way to the chat and introduce yourself, rename yourself. If you're able to do that, please mute your mouth and show us your face if you're comfortable doing that. I'm going to start off by just reviewing our agenda together so you have a sense of what we're doing. Let's see. Right now we're in the opening, and we'll do some opening and grounding for a few minutes. We'll do some small group introductions to allow you to talk to some other folks a little bit. We're so excited to have Sherri Mitchell here to talk, and we'll spend a good chunk of time hearing her thoughts on the moment, thoughts on the movement, thoughts in general, and then give y'all some time, us all some time to do some reflections of it in small groups. We'll take a break at around 4 o'clock and then come back and have more of a group interactive conversation on the keynote discussion. We'll give you some brief updates about what's going on from the organizations level, from the staff level, and then hear from you all a little bit about what you think about our work. And then we'll end with a chance for you all to make some personal commitments about your work for climate justice in the new political phase in the new year, and close out all together. And we'll have a good 15-minute or so break around 4 o'clock. If you need to take care of yourself, feel free. If you need to turn your video off because your dog is jumping in your face, I know, I've been there, feel free. Take care of yourself and meet your needs, and hopefully this will be a rich and interactive time together. I guess I never introduced myself. My name is Sonia Silbert. I'm one of the co-directors on the staff collective here, and I do the trainings program as well. So I'm going to pass it off to Julie.
Great, thank you. Hi folks, my name is Julie Masuga. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm on the staff collective as well. I lead a lot of the fossil fuel resistance campaigns too. I'd like to start by welcoming all of your identities. Your religion, race, gender, sexuality, age, class, legal status, mental and physical ability, and everything else that you're bringing here. Even those identities you might not be able to share with the world. We welcome your whole being. I'd like to acknowledge that I and those of us that are white are visitors here, living on stolen land and amongst people who are stolen and refugees of imperialist violence. When we do a land acknowledgement, it must be followed by action. Without action, our words are hollow. We must also name that in New England, this is the 400-year anniversary of the landing at Plymouth Rock. 400 years of colonization, of violence, of stolen land and genocide, but also 400 years of survival, resistance, and resilience. Many Indigenous people are struggling to gain and hold on to rights and recognition, including in Vermont. To this point, our dear friend Arthur Blackhawk offers us these words, coupled with words from an Abenaki elder. We acknowledge that we are the unceded occupied lands of the Wabanaki Abenaki Nation, who have called Ndagina home for nearly 20,000 years. As occupiers, we acknowledge the need for our communities to support a state proclamation acknowledging Abenaki sovereignty. Please support this work. Please be part of it, and please learn. Work in communion with your Indigenous neighbors and show up when called. And now we acknowledge our ancestors and our descendants, the four directions, Father Sky and Mother Earth, and the plant nations, the two-legged, the four-legged, the creepy crawlers, the swimmers, and the flyers, the standing ones and the rock nation, the wind and water spirits, to the morning star and the great star nation, to all my relatives, now we are one. Thank you and welcome to this space. I think I'm handing it over to Abby.
Thanks, Julie. I'm Abby Manukin. I use she, her pronouns. I am joining from Brattleboro, and I'm also a member of the staff collective. And I am going to continue on that theme in welcoming us into this space together. I actually just had the honor of providing labor support for a mama who's about to have a baby any moment. And one of the things that I love about birth is that there's really nothing else you can possibly do in that moment except help to birth this baby. And so I am going to invite all of us to try to be as present as possible in this moment. It will not likely be the same kind of presence as at a birth, but even though we are on computers and can get easily distracted, the more presence we share with ourselves and with one another, the better this day will be. So if you can find yourself a comfortable position, we're going to do a few minutes of more body-based grounding so that we can more fully arrive together with our hearts, our minds, and our bodies. So in whatever comfortable position you find yourself in, maybe you have, you're sitting on a chair or a cushion, maybe you want to stand for a moment, and just bring attention to your breath. Notice the sensation of the air as you inhale through your nostrils. And again, as you exhale through your mouth. Pause to make room for whatever you may be feeling. And there may be a variety of feelings in your body. They are all welcome, and just be aware of them in this moment. And we'll do a body scan, just starting in the lower part of our body with our feet and our calves, our knees, our thighs. Noticing sensations in our muscles, or your muscles, as you move your attention upward. If you are holding tension and you're able to release it, that's great. Now in our middle bodies, if you can focus on your abdomen, your torso, your lower back. Again, pausing if you notice tension. Now noticing your hands, arms, elbows, shoulders, bringing in awareness of your breath to those areas, allowing them to release as you exhale. And finally, bringing your attention to your neck, your face, your head, sensations that may be present in your jaw or your mouth or your eyes. Allowing areas of tension to relax if you can bring breath to them, and noticing the change in that feeling as the tension releases. And whenever you feel ready and able, you can bring your attention back into this, at least the screen room that we are sharing, and try as much as possible throughout our time together to stay present with your minds, with your bodies, with your hearts, and return to your breath as a way to become refocused again. And I think that I am now passing back, or actually not back, I have the honor of passing to Marisa, who's going to share an original reading with us. Thanks, Marisa.
Yeah, give me just a second because I forgot to bring it into this room with me.
Well, while we're waiting for Marisa, I'll introduce her a little bit. But Marisa has been a node member and a volunteer with 350 Vermont, and is a contributor to the 2 zines we published, as well as an editor of the 2 zines we published this summer on the connections between COVID-19 and the climate crisis. And we invited Marisa to do a short reading about that, just to kind of set the tone a little bit. Partly because as a group we can't sing together on Zoom the way we can in person, so we wanted to at least bring in some parts of that energy. So Marisa, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me all right? This is good. Okay. This is a piece I wrote called "Humanity is Not the Virus." Do not simplify this. Do not shake your head grimly and say we are finally getting what we deserve. It is not your story. Yours is a piece of it, yes, and should be, but only a piece of it. That's why it's complicated. It's not your story. It's not your story. I know narratives of punishment come easy for our species, but stop. Punishment is the artificial weighting of the scales that measures justice in lashes, in dollars, in years. But what about the other hidden equations? Trauma plus addiction equals arrest. Poverty plus anger equals life in prison. Black skin plus America equals death. You really think that math is working? Do not simplify this. Take your hand off the scales. Justice is not the balance of just one thing against one other, but a whole ecosystem of actions and connections. What we're facing is not punishment, it's consequences. If 1 billion people die of coronavirus, extreme weather, and violence, the rest of us will not be absolved and good to go for another 150, 2,000 years. To change the consequences, we must change the cause. A country, a system, an ideology built on the right to profit, the right to control, the right to exploit. You know the powerful take the profits and escape the repercussions. The consequences will be felt most by those least responsible. Do not simplify this. Being human is not the new original sin. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. We were all born into this system. It is nobody's responsibility to die for humanity's sins against the earth. Our responsibility is to pull the emergency brake on this runaway train and build ourselves another track. You are desperate for justice, but you don't know how to stop a train. So you say, serves us right for inventing trains in the first place. But we are the train. We are the emergency brake. We are the tracks and the railroad ties and the crushed rock underneath. We are the passengers. We are the whistle blowing.
Thank you, Marisa. So hopefully all of those things helped kind of bring us all here and felt a little bit more present. Now we'd love to hear who's actually here. We've got a few quick questions that we'd love to ask. First is, where do you live? Who lives where in our group? A poll should have just popped up in front of you, and you can pick where you live so that we know, so we just kind of get a sense of who's here. Is it showing up for folks? Okay, cool. So you can just click whichever one of those is most accurate for you. I'm not seeing any voting. Am I missing something? Are we already having?
For me, it looks like the poll already happened.
We're at 89%.
Oh, my poll already happened. I don't know if that's true for anyone else's.
All right, well, Julie, if it's working for you, let's give it another second and get it to 90% and just see if anyone else
It's
has
at
a
92 now.
All right, will you end it and share the results?
Yeah, let's see. So this is what we have. Did that work? Sonia?
It looks like it worked for some people, but not for me. Will you say out loud where people
Yes. We had 23 people or 33% in southern Vermont, 30 people or 43% in central Vermont, 6 people or 9% in the northeast, and 11 people or 16% in the northwest.
All right, and I should have mentioned, I think those of you on the phone won't be able to fill out this poll. Let's see. So my next question for you is, how long have folks been involved in 350 Vermont? Is that showing up for folks? This is really not, this is the beauty of Zoom technological problems. Is this working for you, Julie? Because I'm only seeing 0. All right, you might be our
It might be
poller.
because I'm the main host.
Oh, and I'm the co-host. Yeah. All right, you might be our poller. So everyone take a sec, fill it out. Let's see. And I will point out that next year is our 10-year anniversary. So there's going to be a few folks here who I think have been around for the whole time.
All right. We're at 84%. So I think I'm going to.
As far as noticing, if you were somewhere between 1 and 2 years, you're SOL.
Oh, oops.
Or you just choose a different option.
Sorry.
Okay. We have 23% that said this was their first time. Welcome. 15% less than a year, 41% 2 to 5 years, 11% 5 to 9 years, and 11% 10 years.
All right. Love the 10-year-olds. Great. Julie, you want to launch the last one?
Yeah, let me do that. All right, so we're now just asking what ways you're connected to 350 Vermont if you've already connected with us.
And you can pick as many as are applicable.
I guess I can't pick on staff because I'm doing the poll, so there should be one more person in there.
Oh yeah, I guess all of this.
No, but none of the staff, none of the hosts can't do the poll.
Well, there's other staff who are here, who are not us, who are not co-hosts. Thanks for bearing with our tech foibles.
People in another couple seconds.
I have a question on board. What do you mean by on board? Just
on the board of directors.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to end it here and share the results. 35% in a node, 3% on staff, which isn't accurate. There's more than 2 of us, I promise. 17% on board, 3% in Mother Up, 5% in the writing group, 32% in an allied organization, 43% have attended trainings, 63% have attended events or rallies, wow. 3% former border staff, and 14% not connected yet.
All right. Great. Well, thank you and welcome. And nice to get a sense of who's here. What we're going to do now is give you all about 10 minutes or so in a small group to introduce yourself a little bit more and get to know someone else who's here. These are randomly assigned, so maybe you will know them, maybe not. We'll invite you to introduce yourself in whatever ways, and then we have some kind of prompt questions that I just put in the chat. Just we're wondering if you'd be up for sharing what's inspiring you right now and what's helping you stay motivated and active in the movement. Welcome back. Sorry to interrupt you so cruelly if that's what just happened. You'll have more chances to talk with each other throughout, I promise. Sorry about that, but thanks everyone for coming back. Glad that you seems like you were having interesting conversations. And we are kind of moving into the main event of the afternoon, and I'll pass it off to Abby.
Thanks, Sonia. We are so honored to have Sherri Mitchell, Wenahamu Gwasit, join us as today's keynote speaker. I had the honor of first meeting Sherri at a library talk in the spring of 2018. And that fall, 350 Brattleboro Mother Up and Post Oil Solutions invited Sherri to return for a 2-day grief, trauma, and healing workshop, which I think several of you joined for. And in the summer of 2019, I was part of a group of Mother Up families that traveled to Nabizin to participate in the healing Turtle Island ceremonies. Sherri is a Native American attorney, teacher, activist, and changemaker who grew up on the Penobscot Indian Reservation. She is the author of Sacred Instructions. If you don't have a copy, I recommend you get one. Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change, and convener of the global healing ceremony, Healing the Wounds of Turtle Island. She is the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, an organization dedicated to the protection of Indigenous land, water, and religious rights, and the preservation of the Indigenous way of life. Sherri works at the intersection between Indigenous rights, climate change, and conscious evolution. She is an alumna of the American Indian Ambassador Program and the Udall Native American Congressional Internship Program. She is the recipient of the Mahoney Dunn International Human Rights and Humanitarian Award, the Spirit of Maine Award for International Human Rights, and the Peace and Justice Center's Hands of Peace Award. Sherri has been a longtime advisor to the American Indian Institute's Traditional Circle of Indian Elders and Youth, and was a program coordinator for their Healing the Future program. She has also served as an advisor to the Indigenous Elders and Medicine Peoples Council of North and South America for the past 20 years, and is a consultant and advisory committee member for Nia Taro's International Indigenous Land Guardianship Program. She currently speaks and teaches around the world, so we are especially honored to have her join us today. There is going to be a period for question and answers following this talk. If you'll put your questions in the chat, several of us will be monitoring the chat and collecting them in a document, and then we'll help kind of pull out the threads that we're seeing in the chat, so Sherri doesn't have to pay attention to that while she talks. And please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Sherri. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Abby. It's so nice to be able to see you all. I was becoming quite spoiled by my frequent visits to Vermont, and I feel like 2020 has really robbed me of my bonding time with the folks in your fine state. So I'm missing being able to be there with you all during this event, and I just want to thank you for including me in this time with you. And so I just want to introduce myself in my language. And Daliwisi Wanahamu Gwasit Najio Banawabskewi, Pasilda and Delnabamo Kawasus, Nil Banawabskewi, Nagakakagus, Nil Tibaik. So my family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Zibayik. And Alita has you and I, and I'm very happy to be with you today. And so I'm glad to be able to invite you into this beginning phase of this new community that I'm forming here. I just recently purchased 213 acres and a farm in our original territory that was given away by the state of Maine the year it became a state in a land grant to a man named Moses Goodwin, who lived here on this land for 150 years, 155 years. Well, he didn't live here for 155 years, but his family did. And then it went to the Masso family, who was here for 45 years. And so the reclaiming of this territory 200 years out from when we first lost this land is very symbolic to me. It's also symbolic to me that there have been only 2 other families that have lived here and who loved this place very, very well. And I am going to plug in. I apologize. I am losing battery very rapidly for some reason. So let me just plug in. Okay, can you still see me? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Now I'm getting a little bit of feedback on my end. So you're my, you're some of my first guests here to sit around my fire with me. So I'm glad to have you joining today. I have a number of questions that I was asked to talk about. And so I'm going to go down through that list. And the first one allows me to get into a bit of storytelling mode, which I'm very happy about. The question is, where are we philosophically in this moment? And I have held a number of webinars and have done a lot of public talks with different people around the world, not just around the country, but around the world, who have stories and insights to share about the times that we're living in. And I have had the incredible honor of participating in the creation of 2 books that are both out right now. One of them is All We Can Save, which is a book that I'm incredibly proud to be a part of. And it's a book by 60 women all writing about climate change. And so if you have the opportunity to pick that up, I would encourage you to do so. It's a bestseller. It is one of the most beautiful, stunning books I've ever read. And it would make an incredible gift for somebody who needs to have a sense of hope right now. All We Can Save is based on kind of a reverse image of a poem that talks about looking at all that I can't save in this moment, and grieving over all that can't be saved in this moment. And I think that many of us have been experiencing incredible grief during this time, not only because there are things that we are, the title of the book, Rod, is All We Can Save, is the top title, and it's Catherine Wilkinson and Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who are the 2 editors of the book. And where not only are we grieving what's happened in this country over the last 4 years, we're also grieving the incredible loss of life. And we're grieving our way of life. For many people are grieving their way of life because the way that they have been accustomed to living is no longer available to them during the pandemic. And so they're having to face themselves. Some people are having to face themselves for the very first time in their lives without distraction. And it's a very complex and challenging time. as we heard in the beautiful words that were offered to us as an opening. It's a very complex time. There's no simple cause and there's no simple solution. And so I want to share with you a story that I've told many times during the pandemic that I think is really important right now because it helps us to be mindful of our place within the larger scheme of creation. And so within our tradition, we have a story of the first illness. And in this story, which is a very, very old story, it gets passed down generation to generation. So my great grandmother's grandmother told her this story, who then told her granddaughter, who told her granddaughter, who told her granddaughter, who in turn told me, my grandmother. So this story is a very old story, and it's just so astounding to me how time and time again our stories end up reflecting the reality that we're living in. And so, these are not just stories. There's an elder, Teresa Sapier, who's Willistic, who's from one of our other Wabanaki nations. And before she told a story, she used to say in the language, this is not just a story, this really happened. And so I'm saying that to you right now, that this is not just a story, this really happened. And now it's happening again, and we're experiencing it. So in this story, human beings who are the youngest species on the planet have begun to walk away from all of the other beings in creation. And this story is often told during our midwinter gathering, and we've already had all of our creation stories told by the time this story is told. And so in all of the creation stories, the animals and the plants and the trees are instrumental in our ability to survive and sustain ourselves on Mother Earth as human beings, the youngest species. And so we've begun to walk away from our relatives in the natural world. And not only have we walked away from them, but we have started to create things that are actually harming our relatives. We have begun to behave in ways that are causing other living beings to have their lives taken away from them. And so, to tell the full measure of this story, we would need a whole day sitting at this fire. This is just the snapshot, as my friend Kevin Deere says, the Reader's Digest version of the story. And so the animals are pretty dismayed by what's going on with the human beings. And so they go into council together to say, what are we going to do about our young relatives here who are behaving so badly? And they really deliberate for a long time, because a lot of animals offered their lives for us to be able to live and survive upon Mother Earth from the very beginning of time. And they care greatly for us as their younger relatives. But they recognize that there needs to be something needs to happen in order for human beings to recognize their connection to the rest of creation and to stop believing that they're somehow separated. And so in my humble opinion, I believe that, there was a mention of original sin, that this notion of original sin is really just about othering. It's about us starting to see ourselves as something other than the rest of the beings within creation. When we started feeling like, I'm something other than you. To me, that interest in that Christian story is not the eating of an apple. It's the moment when the human beings felt like they had to cover themselves because they felt like they were something different from the rest of nature. And so, we have fallen into this illusion of othering that we've been starting to wake up from collectively. And so the animals decide, after long deliberation and a lot of grief, that they're going to have to give the human beings illness in order for the human beings to recognize their connection to the rest of creation. And so they give the human beings illness that man-made medicine can't cure. And the only way for them to get well is for them to make some substantial changes. And so after seeing the human being suffering for a long period of time, the trees and the plants begin to take pity on them, and they start to feel sad for their young relatives that they're suffering so much. And So many of them are dying. And so the trees and the plants go into council together, and they talk about how can we save or help our young relatives get through this challenge without taking away the benefit of the lesson from them. And so they talk for a long time, and they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to send out a message through the dream time to the human beings and tell them that if they will only relearn the language of the plants and trees and reconnect themselves back to the natural world, then the plants and the trees will tell them where to find the medicine that they need in order to heal themselves. And so they float that story out on the dream, and one of the grandmothers catches that story in her sleep. And when she wakes, she tells the others what she's dreamt of. And she said, I'm going to the forest to reconnect myself with the plants and the trees. And so she goes into the forest and she spends time and she reconnects herself to the plants and the trees, and asks them humbly, over and over again, may I benefit from the knowledge that you carry so that I'll learn how to heal my people once again. And we can be restored to our rightful relationship within this larger scheme of creation. And so after a time, the plants and the trees begin to see the sincerity of this grandmother, and then they begin to communicate with her again, and she relearns the language of the plants and the trees. And then they tell her which plants that she needs to be able to bring her people out of this illness that's been given to them by the animals. And then they learn which trees and specific foods are going to strengthen their bodies once they turn the corner from this illness and they can get strong again. And so she takes that information back to her people, and they prepare. The plants and the trees have taught her not only which medicines, but how to harvest them honorably and respectfully, how to prepare them, how to dose them, so that the people can get well again. And the people in her community begin to get well, and then they begin to tell others about what has happened to them. And so some others choose to also go back and to renew their relationships with the plants and the trees. And the people of that grandmother, they decided that they were going to move back closer to the forest. They were going to simplify their lives and live once again within this equitable balance with the rest of creation. And the way that I was told the story was that we were the ones who were of the people who went back. And so right now we're being given this amazing opportunity to contemplate our place within creation as a result of an illness that has been given to us by the animals. And so as we've been going through this, at the very beginning of this, one of the things that I did every single day was I went out and I prayed and I made offerings to ask for guidance from the winged nations, WINGED, winged nations, to ask them, what is it that we have to learn? And I had this incredible experience with about 10,000 starlings. And what those starlings taught me was that we need to be moving right now as one biological entity. And as my friend Rivera's son would say, a leaderful movement that allows us to, shift directions and adapt as needed to the rapid changes that are coming towards us in response to what the perceived threat is to us as human beings and to the rest of life, which is climate change. And so we all know that climate change is something that needs to be at the top of our radar right now, that it's the one thing that we all are experiencing collectively and that we will all experience, though not in the same time frame and certainly not to the same degree. There are populations of people who are being terribly threatened by climate change. And so, this moves me into the next question, which is, how can we be a climate change movement rather than being part of a climate change movement? How can we become a climate change movement in and of ourselves? And there's a fantastic book that was written. It came out a couple years ago which is Drawdown. Paul Hawkins' name is on the cover. My friend Catherine Wilkinson did a majority of the writing and editing for that book project. And it has 100 solutions, 100 most promising solutions to climate change. And within that, there is something for everyone. And so you can, I would encourage you all to, contact your local library, see if you can get a copy of Drawdown, or look for it in your local bookstore, or ask your local bookstore to order it for you. It's really phenomenal. And there will be a follow-up that will be coming out eventually. But that book is based on the best science that is available to us today, that allows for us to find our space within all of these different potential solutions to climate change, because we can't all do everything. But what we can do as a collective is we can begin to move ourselves into a way of living. Thank you, Lily. We can begin to move ourselves into a way of living that is not so damaging to the earth. And that's what I'm doing here by building this community here at Wajukum Tultina. Wajukum Tultina Kinship Community is the name of the community that I'm building here. And Wajukum Tultina means let's help one another. We want to be able to live in this way, but we can't do it individually. How many of you, just raise your hand, would love to be living a low impact or no impact environmental life? How many of you would like to be living low grid or completely off grid lifestyle, right? And how many of you are obstructed or challenged to do that because you live individually, right? And so, I think that the majority of us want to be living in a way that is less damaging to the earth, but our individualized lifestyles are not designed to allow us to do so. And so the more we chase this illusory dream that's part of this illusion of separation that we've fallen into, is we need to start moving away from individualized living and moving back into communal living. And I've been saying this, Abby can attest to this, I've been saying this for years. This is something that has been obvious, and it sounds like, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, we all know this, right? But how are you taking steps to actually do that? How are you moving yourself in the direction of living a more communal life? Do you have food sharing options set up with a group of 5 neighbors? Do you have tool sharing? Do you have a whole litany of other sharing options that you have incorporated into your daily way of life that is actually reducing your consumption and increasing the amount of communal time that you're living in, and allowing you to take away some of the impact of your life, your footprint on Mother Earth. And so there are a lot of ways for us to be able to do that. And some of those ways are in that book. Some of those ways are actually a little bit prohibitive for us during COVID. But actually, in some ways, COVID is allowing us to move further along the line in relation to that, because people are staying home more. They're not traveling. People are learning a very valuable lesson at this time. The second book that I have had the incredible opportunity to be a part of, which I am one of the editors on, is a book that's just out this month. What is the date today? It'll be out in 3 days on December 8th, and it's called Corona Transmissions. And Corona Transmissions is a book that has all of this input on what is being taught to us during this time of the coronavirus, everything from the physical to the medical physical. So there's doctors and, all kinds of people from all walks of life who are included in this, who are providing essays on what coronavirus has meant to them. And so that leads me into the next question that's on my list, which is, what is it that this time is teaching us? And what this time is teaching us, of course, the primary thing that I have been learning as a result of this time of quarantine is what I can live without that I thought was essential to my happiness. What is it that I can live without that at one time I just felt like I really had to have? And so, you know, we're being given this incredible opportunity to learn how can we pare down our lives in a way that allows us to reduce our impact on the earth. And I think that this is an exciting opportunity. Another thing is that people are having such a difficult time because they're so accustomed to being able to be with people. People who live alone are especially having a difficult time, which is really highlighting and illustrating. There's been a huge increase in suicides and mental health crises that have emerged as a result of COVID. And that's because this time is also highlighting for us that we were not meant to live alone. We were not meant to live alone. And so when you're in this completely isolated way of living for 6, 7, 8 months, and you haven't had time to prepare your community in order to shift enough to adapt to this rapidly changing world. Yes, family support is incredibly important, but there are a lot of people who don't have connection to their families of birth, who need family of choice. There are a lot of people who have been very happy living individual lives until suddenly they're sick and they need something. There's nobody to check in on them to make sure that they're okay. You know, that this whole aspect of community is really being highlighted for us in ways that are unexpected. And maybe you haven't been impacted by that yet. But I'm sure that at this point, most of you have someone in your circle who has. I have a number of people that I know who are people that I love who have lost family members to COVID. I have a friend whose husband survived pancreatic cancer, one of the worst types of cancer that you can get, and had been cancer free for 9 months and got COVID and ended up dying within 3 weeks, and because of a compromised immune system. And so, you know, there's this incredible grief and this incredible pain, but also, you know, in the vulnerability of the moment, it's causing us to sit up and say, you know, the ways that we have been living are really not in alignment with us being able to survive into the future if COVID is just the introductory lesson, which is what our prophecies tell us, is that COVID is the introductory lesson. This is the bell that's ringing, that's telling us all how we need to shift, how we need to be moving and realigning our lives so that we can be prepared to survive into the future by making these necessary changes to the way that we're living. So we're learning, you know, that what we thought we couldn't live without, maybe we can. We're learning to pare down. We're learning that community is critically important, whether that's family of birth or family of choice. We're learning also that this belief in separation that we've been operating under, this illusion, is simply that. It's an illusion. We have, as a whole, been more connected and had more conversations with more people over the last 6, 7, or 8 months than many of us have had in our entire lives. I have people who, you know, they're just homebodies. They've never really traveled anywhere. They've never gone anywhere. And they said that they have been introduced just by following some of my webinars and the online Healing Turtle Island gathering this year, where we had 45,000 viewers and speakers from 30 different Indigenous nations. There are people who tuned into that who had never had any type of contact with anyone outside of their small circle of people living within, a 50 to 100-mile radius of them. And so we're learning that this notion of separation is an illusion. I've been in events where there's a great distance between the people who are facing each other on the camera. And then I've been in others where we start out with a moment of conscious connection with one another, where we actually feel like we're really in the room with one another. And so recognizing that we can enter into a space within us that sheds the distance between us and actually connects us in tangible ways, that is helping us to move beyond this illusion of separation. And so there's all kinds of things that COVID is teaching us. Certainly, it's teaching us that we have infringed upon the habitat of our relatives in the natural world to a degree that is so significant that the animals now have no choice but to give us illness to help us to understand, to respect their right to live their lives unmolested by human activity. The land also has the right to sovereignty. The land has the right to live without the expectation of productivity imposed upon it by human beings. And so when we start thinking about all of the things that we're learning during this time, we're start to think about what can we do as individuals in order to become part of a larger climate movement. I think that building community collectives where maybe you can't have face-to-face contact with your neighbor, but maybe your neighbor can drop bread off on your doorstep, and you can drop a casserole off on their doorstep, and you can still be working to share food in some way now that we know that that COVID is less likely to be transmitted through food or hand-to-hand contact as opposed to respiratory contact. And so now that we know a little bit more about how it's transmitted, we can take precautions and we can still go back to sharing food with one another. Maybe you isolate yourselves and you find a way to live connected to your own pod of people where you're all supporting one another in getting what you need to be able to survive and to sustain yourselves. Maybe you're initiating conversations about what it is that you're learning to live without during this time that really wasn't necessary to your ability to have a full life, even though in the past you thought that it was. Maybe it's Starbucks coffee, whatever it is. So those who know me well, here's my iced tea, not in a Dunkin' Donuts cup, and it's delicious. And I love it just as much as I loved my easy grab and go Dunkin' Donuts. And so, when we start to think about those simple things, it's easy for us to see what we can do individually. It's easy for us to see what we can do collectively. And as we're doing those things, as we're taking it upon ourselves to look through the 100 solutions to climate change and see what fits within your community. Can you form an energy collective within your community where everybody is contributing to a community grid system that helps to move a whole block of people off grid? Are you contributing to recycling programs? Are you committed to helping to restore the soil? Are you committed to protecting the waters as a collective? What is it that you're willing to commit to that you can tune into with a laser sharp focus? Because when we try to do everything, our laser becomes diffused and we're not effective at anything. But when we can, with one group of people, focus our energy on solving one thing that's within those 100 solutions, and really working on that as a collective, what we can accomplish is amazing. I just finished working with 150 people from across the United States, developing a strategic plan for climate change under the ACE framework from the UN that has been presented to President-elect Biden. And there's so many things that grassroots people can do in order to address the challenges that we're facing. We need to bring carbon back down to earth, right? It's not about eliminating all the carbon. We just don't want it up in the atmosphere. We want to bring it back down. So that's the whole principle behind drawdown. We're drawing it back down. Look into what does that. What can you plant that is going to draw carbon back down? How can you participate in this global drawdown effort? How can you protect the waterways? Right now in Minnesota, Enbridge, who is a terrible actor, they have an atrocious track record, is building what they're calling Line 3 to replace an old damaged pipeline that they don't want to bother cleaning up. And it's going to go right through all of these beautiful lakes in Minnesota, right through the lakes region. And it's going to go right through the wild rice lakes, right through Anishinaabe territory. So they always have to, bring these pipelines through an indigenous territory. And then it's going to go under the Mississippi River, right? And so when you're thinking about, this country of yours, America, the Mississippi River is part of your folklore, right? And the destruction that is being created as a result of this is catastrophic to the environment and completely heedless about the safety to the human beings who are there. And so they also will have to bring hundreds of people in from some of the areas that are hardest hit. These workers are going to come in from the Dakotas, right, where the last pipeline was built, and they're going to come over to Minnesota, hundreds of them, and they're going to be contaminating all of the people who live in these very, very small towns in Minnesota, where they have very limited access to healthcare and very, very few hospital beds. And so imagine the catastrophic outcome that this whole project could have, which is being very carelessly fast-tracked. How can you learn about things like that and get involved in that? A good friend of mine, Tara Huska, who's with the Ginu Collection, GINIW, they have camps on the front line. You can give to the Ginu Collective and help to support them as we're bracing for a quiet holiday season, because we can't gather with our families. They're bracing for a brutal Minnesota winter in this frontline camp to try to stop this pipeline from coming in to destroy their entire territory. And so these are the things that you can do as an individual. You can get on your phone and you can call and you can say, demand that your representatives stop what's going on here, because this has been fast-track permitted by the Army Corps of Engineers under the Trump administration during this lame duck session in order to try to move this forward and get it to the degree where it cannot be stopped, right? Because of these legal principles of equitable estoppel. So anyway, we won't get into all that, but those are things that you can be doing as individuals to be making a huge difference, because not only is it impacting the people in that territory, but everywhere that water flows. I mean, in that area, right, in those regions are some of the largest aquifers that supply water to a huge population of the country. And if those waterways are contaminated by, Dakota Access Pipeline, by Enbridge Line 3 and Keystone XL, they're all coming right through what's called the heartland, right? Where all of those tributaries spill out to feed, and we really need to think about that metaphor, right? The heart is pumping the blood, the lifeblood of Mother Earth is our sacred waterways. And so when we think about the heart pumping blood and moving all of that, that water from the heartland out to the people. And it's contaminated by tar sands, which tar sands pipelines always leak because of the bitumen, because it's so viscous, right? And we know this. And so getting involved in those types of activities right now is critically important, because there's been a lot of activity that's been taking place while people are distracted by COVID. And they're trying to just quietly move through and wreak this destruction on the land here without anybody noticing. And I think that that's really critically important. And the last thing that question I'm going to answer before we go to question and answers for the last 15 or 20 minutes is how did this election impact us? And what does it mean for our movements? And I think that the easy answer to that is it's too early to tell, right? We all know that Joe Biden has been a big supporter of hydrofracking. What he does going forward remains to be seen, whether people can put enough pressure on him to be able to do something differently is something that we're not sure of. And like I said, we have presented him with this ACE framework that is a grassroots nationwide effort to address climate change across a broad spectrum of platforms. You know, I mean, he doesn't have a great track record. He doesn't have a great track record on race relations. He doesn't have a good track record on Indigenous rights. He doesn't have a great track record on the environment. But some of the people that he's putting in place have done better. And hopefully they'll have an influence on him. So I just really don't think that we know yet what this election means. But one thing that I do know that it means is that now is the time to put your foot on the Fred Flintstone pedal, right? We don't want to put our foot on the gas, but just put your feet to the ground. Like, here is where we need to be making friction so that we can create movement, not sitting back and saying, oh, thank God we have a new president, everything's great. Because the distraction of the distortions of the Trump administration, there's no way Joe Biden would have been elected if we hadn't had a Donald Trump. Just the extremes are the only thing that really got Joe Biden elected, if we're being honest about the political situation. And so, we can't be distracted by that. We have to recognize that now is the time, because all of them have been moving us further and further and further to the right. All of them have been supporting increased destructions of Mother Earth. Every single one of them, right, that we've had for the last 50 years has really not moved the arrow on social justice, racial justice, economic justice. And so this is not the time for us to sit back and think that things are going to be okay. Now is the time for us to say, okay, now is the time for us to really move, because we know that there are at least people surrounding the new president who have historically made better choices than the politicians that we've had thus far. And if we can influence them and influence our congressional leaders and hopefully a brand new Senate, let's hope that Georgia comes through for us again, then maybe we can move this arrow back in alignment with sustainability of life on this beautiful earth that we all share. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherri, for those words. It's so great to hear from you again after all this time. We're collecting some questions, so feel free to add some to the chat, but maybe we'll start with one that feels like you touched upon it, but would love to hear a little bit more about incorporating healing into activism, and suggestions for how you think that that can be integrated thoughtfully and effectively.
Yeah, I think that this is really critically important. And one of the things that often obstructs our most sincere intentions and our greatest plans for collective action is our our lack of willingness to actually do the healing work that needs to be done in order for us to properly connect with one another and to see one another. The training that Abby is talking about, that she and some others participated in, is one step towards doing that. And there are multiple levels of that at this point in time that are now available. Healing the wounds of Turtle Island is another step, like really getting into looking at what is your history of trauma that you're connected to. And it's not just your ancestral trauma, but what communities have you been connected to that have history of trauma? Because we all have been traumatized, right? We have all either been experiencing, inflicting, or witnessing incredible violence. And our ancestors have as well for millennia. And so, what are the impacts of that trauma on us? How has it influenced us and caused us to see one another in a way that is distorted? Looking at each other through cloudy glass, we might look really scary. But if we're able to clear that lens and really see one another, then we have a greater opportunity to be able to connect and to work with one another effectively toward solving the problems that we're facing, rather than fighting over who's got the better idea, right? It's kind of like kids on the playground who say, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to have my dad beat you up, and my dad's bigger than your dad, kind of stuff. Like, right? We have these built-in and ingrained ideas that have influenced the ways that we've related to other people. Maybe we've been taught that this particular group of people over here is dangerous, right? I always say that we have been so conditioned to feel that dark is dangerous, that we apply that to everything. We have been very, very conditioned. I think that it's, the people on this call is the proverbial choir, so to speak, but majority of people on the planet have been conditioned to believe that the forest is dangerous, that the natural world is a dank and dirty place that you just don't want to be connected to. So there's all kinds of conditioning that we have to be able to undo. It's decolonization. If you're here in this country, especially, I think most of the people on this call right now, it's really about decolonizing your minds in really powerful ways. And so we have to decolonize our minds. We have to be able to understand the difference between colonization and oppression. We have to recognize that colonization is always attached to an indigenous population who have been in some ways displaced from the lands that are being occupied. And so, going through this process of decolonizing our minds so that we can look at all the ways that we have been conditioned and entrained to see one another, and oftentimes, the very solutions that we need as being dangerous or terrifying is the first step. You can't really go into the other work unless you've been willing to really look at, how have I been trained to think by my society, my educational institutions, by my religious institution, and whatever social gospel is prominent. How have those things conditioned me, and how has punishment conditioned me to view myself and others and behave accordingly, right? That conditioning that comes with punishment that we also heard about at the very beginning from Marisa. That was just, or how do you say your name? Marisa? That we have been really conditioned to be punitive. And we're oftentimes calculating, how can I punish this person for doing X, Y, or Z, right? whether you are the newly appointed queen of the land of passive aggressivo, or whether you are really, the king of assault, right? And so we really need to be able to look into all of these things that are keeping us from connecting. And this that somebody just posted this, that we can't heal without spirit, or I couldn't see all of it, I just saw a little portion of it. I'm assuming they said spirit. They could have said spirulina for all I know. But I saw SPIR. So
spiritual growth. No healing is possible without spiritual growth.
And that's absolutely true. I mean, one of the illusions of our time is this belief in a separation from spirit, right? And that whole rationalism period of time that created this elitism of being somehow more intelligent and more worldly if you're not attached to specific spiritual beliefs, which is really religiosity, right? And we have to recognize the clear distinction between religiosity and spirit, and the difference between being attached to religiosity and being attached to a true process of spiritual growth as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. I'll jump to Marisa's question, since you mentioned her and she has one in the chat. Marisa says that she found that drawdown solutions primarily focused on converting our current lifestyle to a techier or more renewable version, but not as much actually changing the way we live, and wonder about your thoughts on that. And if you can suggest resources that might address some of the more fundamental changes, like you spoke about communal living, changing our separation worldview, and what those resources are that you might point to in addition to drawdown, or if you also found that about the book.
So one of the things that I've done in the past 2 years, I can just say one organization that I did this for, and I can say this now because I'm on their advisory board, is Neotero, who is working all over the world. And I have also done trainings for 2 of the other biggest conservation, climate change orgs on the planet, and had to sign an NDA about it. So we won't talk about them, but we will talk about the fact that there has been an effort being made to completely restructure policies and procedures from the inside out for these organizations. And one of the things that I have found in every single organization that I've worked with, from the biggest to the smallest, is that climate change organizations on a global scale oftentimes are moving people into a marketplace, their adaptation strategies for climate change. It's not just greenwashed technology, right? It's moving people away from ways of living that are in alignment with the sustaining of our lives. So working with indigenous populations from Amazonia, all the way to Africa, and looking at what are the climate change strategies that have been put forward by the peoples who are most impacted by frontline climate change at this time. All of those solutions have been greenwashed solutions that move those people away from the way of life that has been identified as preserving the greatest amount of land and waterways on the planet, and toward a way of life that is actually in alignment with the destruction of the planet. I mean, this is insanity, right? This is insanity, where not only are we doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome, but we're actually moving people away from solution-based ways of living toward ways of living that are aligned with problematic ways of being in relation to life. And so I think that this is a huge problem, and it's not just in one area. It's not just in one climate change organization. It's across the board that this is happening. So, you're right on the money, Marisa, that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. And what we need to be doing is we need to be looking at climate change adaptation that's in alignment with cultural values of the people who are being removed, but also that's in alignment with ways of living and ways of being and ways of knowing that are more connected to the earth, that are more respectful of other living beings, and that are moving people back towards a more indigenized relationship with life. So.
Thank you. I miss that first resource when you started and I wanted to write it down. It sounded like, yeah, Mia's Tarot is what it sounded like to me.
Nia Tarot is the organization that I was able to name because Nia Tarot, I'm on, you read it, that I'm on their advisory.
Great. I'll link to that. Perfect.
Nia Tarot does incredible land guardianship work for indigenous populations all over the planet. And yeah, and so that was something that we talked about and we addressed that, you know, we can't be moving people into, you know, you can't go and take an indigenous population, we'll just say in the middle of the Amazon, who is being affected by deforestation and they've been completely displaced. And then try to move them into some marketplace economy way of living that's completely foreign to them, but also is in alignment with the destruction of the planet and call that a climate change solution because it's not a climate change solution. Any more than creating a cap and trade market for our air under carbon credits is a climate change solution. That is the biggest smoke and mirrors scam that has ever come along. And that's why I was like, okay, fine. I'm not mad that we're not in the Paris Agreement, because everybody agreed to it because it's a creation of a commodities market, and the commodity is our air. And so, you know, let's start being honest about what is a climate change solution and what is not a climate change solution, and stop promoting the go along to get along false promises that greenwash solutions are providing to us.
That's a perfect transition to a question from Isaac. It sounds like you already somewhat answered it, but he asks, do you think the attempt to maintain economic growth, which is a feature of almost all pieces of climate legislation that have been put forward globally, is a barrier to understanding our society's need for more transformational change, including our need to reduce consumption and live collectively?
Absolutely, I do, 100%. And, you know, the whole premise of Wajukam Tultina here, this kinship community, is moving away from an exchange economy, right? Because there's always winners and losers when we're working within an exchange economy, because it's the world is a small place, but it's too big a place to create equitable parameters that are not going to be morphing into inequity and injustice over the grand expanse of our various societies. And so really moving yourself as an individual, one of the most powerful things that you can do, and that's what the whole system is going to be based on here at Wajukam Tultina, is really looking at a maternal economy. And so we have to put in our imagery, what does a whole, healthy, loving mother do to care for her children? A whole, healthy, loving mother makes sure that her children have enough, right? And I talk about this in Sacred Instructions. I talk about Mama Bizu and Ala Bizu. And so Mama Bizu means I have enough to live my life with dignity. I have enough food, I have enough shelter, I have sense of belonging, I have a sense of security, everything that I need to be well and to be whole, so that whatever I'm carrying within me can actually rise up and come forward and benefit the whole rest of the community, right? And the whole rest of life. And Ala Bizu is, does everyone have enough, right? And we recognize that Mama Bizu can't exist. I can't have enough if Ala Bizu isn't true, because part of my sense of well-being is connected to the well-being of all others. So if I have this false sense of well-being, but all others don't have that same sense of well-being, my sense of well-being is not full, it's not whole. And so the two of those things go hand in hand. And so how can you create a community structure? One of the stories that I tell all the time, many of you have probably heard me tell this story before, if you've heard me speak before, of, you know, growing up and being a little girl where one of my grandparents, because I was essentially raised by my grandparents, one of my grandparents would grab me before the sun came up. And when it was my grandmother, she would bundle me. I just have this memory of being really small and her yanking on the strings of my hood of this coat that I had a hood on, and tying it tight and bundling me all up and talking to me the whole time, and sending me with a bag of food in one instance, a bag of winter clothes, winter boots, and snow pants, gloves and mittens for a neighbor, and telling me, you know, I want you to go this way and walk past this person's house, and then I want you to cut up through the woods. I want you to put this on their door handle, and then you take a branch and you wipe away your footprints in the snow so they can't tell where you came from. And then you walk back around this way, you know, and the whole time you're wiping your footprints because I don't want anybody to be able to figure out that it was you. Having me ask her later, why don't you just give these things to them and let them know that you're giving them to them? And her response was, I don't want them to be embarrassed if they see me on the street. And so, she was preserving their sense of dignity. She didn't want them to feel like they had to ask for something in order to have everything that they needed to be okay. She wanted to make sure that they were provided with that without any expectation to give something back to someone else. And I have 65 first cousins. My grandparents had 14 children, and we are a prolific group, right? And so she made sure that we all had enough. But then she also made sure that everyone else in the community had enough. She was the living example of that. When she passed, they talked about her in regard to this really pure form of love, right? What is the word? Somebody knows the word. I know the word. I just can't think of it right now. Agape. And so she just had this pure form of mother love where there were, hundreds of people at her funeral talking about how when they were a small child, she always made sure that they had winter boots because their parents had a big family and they couldn't afford to make sure everybody had good winter boots, gloves, hats, mittens, coats. She made sure everybody had those things. And that's really what it's all about. And we need to move away from this thinking about an economy in regard to winners or losers. Something else that I talk about in the book is this concept of competition, that we have. We always had competition within our traditional societies. But for us, competition never determined someone's ability to be able to live or die, right? Someone's ability to be able to sustain themselves. We now live in a society and have an economy that's based on this sense of competition where people are, the outcome of that competition is going to determine whether somebody keeps their home, whether they keep their job, whether they're able to feed their family, whether they have to choose between food and medicine, whether they have to choose between heating their house and feeding their kids. There needs to be an elimination of all of those forms of competition that have those types of outcomes. And the economy that currently exists is based on the development of greater and greater aspects of competition and an equitable exchange balance, an equitable power balance that can never get us to the place that an economy based on maternal love, maternal economy that has principles of Mama Bizu and Allah Bizu balanced can deliver to us. So. Okay.
Thank you so much. I wonder if you have time for one final question, and then we want to make sure that you have time enough to prepare. Yeah, we want you to prepare for the storm as best you can. And we so appreciate your time, and you've given us so much to think and talk about. But maybe if we can end on a question that really focuses on centering justice in the work that we're doing as as climate activists and organizers, and how we do that well, especially for those of us who are white or have other privileges. And there's some questions about how that might be similar or different when we're talking about the work of decolonization and anti-racism, or the flip side, colonization and oppression, and like working to dismantle those, because there are similarities and differences. But whatever your final thoughts are on that bundle of questions, we would so appreciate it. And then we will be also talking about those themes and questions in smaller breakout groups, and really for the entirety of the work that we're doing. So we don't expect you to, this will launch us into our small group.
Well, obviously I can't answer the whole thing, but I would like to say to the debate that's going on the chat that it's really a good idea to not get locked up in terminology, and to just, recognize where is the convergence of interest, right? Because that's another form of competition. Well, I like to say this. No, I want to say this. And we really need to start thinking about that. If we're going to start thinking about justice, we need to start thinking about the ways that we engage one another and the ways that we engage life, and how can we have conversation about something that's really critically important. Our lives literally depend on how we engage this conversation right now. The lives of I'm a grandmother now. Some of you may not know that. And so
yay, congratulations. Yay.
Yeah. And so I have this amazing 2-year-old granddaughter who I want to be able to not only survive into the future, and someday be a mother herself, but I would love for her to be able to thrive. That's not possible if I can't get over myself and show up for the work that needs to be done. And so, so when we're talking about justice, I mean, it starts with an individual, right? But also the centering of social justice issues is at the heart of the problems that we're facing. If you look at environmental destruction, environmental racism has been a huge problem. Back in the 1930s, Felix Cohen said that the American Indian is the miner's canary, and signaled the shift from fresh air to poisonous gas in our political systems. And here we are, in 2020. Still having the same conversations, and not having learned from what those who have been on the front lines have been trying to warn about forever. I mean, when I was a little girl, back in the 70s, they had that commercial of that fake Indian guy from the Sicilian guy with the one tear coming down his face, right? To demonstrate, look at the pollution out here, so that we could get a Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act passed in Congress. And now here we are with one administration, 3.5 years of functional, I don't know if we can call it leadership, functional governance that has unraveled some of our most important protections environmentally 50 years, right? And so, when I'm talking about this stuff, there's a class that I teach online. It's available on my website called The Cultivation of Warriors, where we talk about soil, right? And what does the soil need to grow? And there's this whole list of things, but there's also a warning, because it's really about how do we cultivate the soil that we're growing our future leaders in, that the soil can be contaminated in one day. One Line 3 Enbridge pipeline spill can contaminate the soil for a generation. And also, thank you, Julie. There's also a class that I'm teaching right now on, if you go to my website that Julie's just posting, on the front page of it, it'll say, check out this new class. I'm teaching a class that starts on the 15th, and there's only 100 spots open in that class. And I've gotten a lot of emails from people saying, I'm going to register for your class. And so, it's first come, first serve, because it's all done online. And I'm teaching the 6-week seminar with a colleague of mine, Dr. Darren Ranko, who is the chair of the Native Studies program at the University of Maine. He is one of the most brilliant thinkers about this these issues that I've ever worked with. And he and I have a lot of respect for one another. And we're going to teach this course together on racism, colonization, and other distortions of thought. So, there's a whole glossary of terms that's going to be included with that seminar. And it's important for people to understand, how can I be an effective ally? How can I navigate issues of race and colonization and oppression and privilege, and understand the distinctions between all of these different things and how they intersect, and how I can be an effective change maker in the midst of all of this confusion, because it gets so complicated and people don't understand the terminology. One of the catchphrases of the day is, let's decolonize decolonization, because everything's being labeled decolonization and not everything is decolonization. And so, there's a minefield to navigate as we're moving through this time. And so this course is specifically designed to address that issue, Abby. And we're doing it in a 6-week seminar. So, being able to understand, look for some resources that help you to understand all of the terminology, be willing to do the work, and be willing to learn, to educate yourself, and ask a lot of questions. I think that, one of the things that I talk about as a core value in Sacred Instructions is being humble. And the key to good leadership is being humble. And what that translates to is being willing to learn, right? Continuing to have an openness for learning. Because if you take on a leadership role and you're unwilling to listen to anyone else, if you're unwilling to learn, then you're going to be a terrible leader. You're not going to be an effective leader. You're going to have a very limited scope. Because the wealth and the breadth of information that's available to you out there is going to be lost to you if you're unwilling to ask, if you're unwilling to learn, if you're unwilling to question yourself and to encourage others to question you. You're never going to have full flowing expression of creative intelligence moving through whatever it is that you're doing if you can't allow yourself to continue to learn. And I've seen a lot of people who are old line activists who are just like, I'm too old to change. I'll leave that to the younger people. But you're still in the movement. You're taking up space. If you're going to take up space, then you need to take up space from a perspective of being willing to learn and to grow and to move with what's going on. Otherwise, you're a hindrance to the movement, in some ways. And maybe you're just a teacher in the movement of showing everybody else how things need to change. I think that this is something that people really need to be thinking about and looking at, that everything that we're leaving to the young people is going to crush them, right? And so we need to really hold up our part of the sky right now. And everybody needs to be doing that. Everybody needs to be holding up their part of the sky. And that means really centering social justice work, in regard to racial equity, economic equity, looking at the disproportionate impacts of climate change on certain populations, whatever that is, that needs to be a central part of the discussion. Otherwise, you're going to be completely ineffective at doing that work. So.
Thank you so much, Sherri. There is
Thank you all.
So much to think about and continue learning and discussing, and we're so grateful for you sharing part of this snowy or rainy afternoon with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us near your fire.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and there's actually a good solid coating of snow out there, so I'm excited. It's gonna crunch under my feet. You can imagine it when I go out and I pick up some snows.
Yay.
So thank you all so much for having me and for being in this work. Thank you for showing up in a time that is so challenging, in a time where people are struggling to just get through their day-to-day life. Thank you for continuing to show up, because the work that you're doing in regard to climate change with 350 Vermont, this work is for the benefit of us all. And I just want to acknowledge and honor you for doing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will be going into small groups to talk more about Sherri's talk. I've put some questions in the chat, and Julie will be breaking us up into smaller groups so that we can have a chance to reflect a little bit of this and integrate a little bit, and then we'll be taking a short break. So thank you again, Sherri, and thanks everyone for listening, being active listeners. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everybody's questions. I know that there were a lot of great questions, and Sherri could have spoken to all of them, and we would have, I think, all been happy to hear. But we also wanted to save time for these small groups and also respect Sherri's time and her concern for the storm, the growing storm in Maine. So yeah, we will break into small groups to talk about. I've put 4 questions in the chat, and you can use these as a guide. That says, how can decolonization become more central to our climate justice organizing? How can we address the illusion of separation Sherri speaks about in our climate organizing? What would a maternal economy look like in your community, in Vermont, in the country? And how else can we incorporate Sherri's teachings into our work? So we will also be able, I think Julie will be able to share these with you once you get into your breakout groups, if you forget, because I know that's a lot, but just use this time to share with each other some reflections and integrations.
All right, let's get started. We wanted to take a little bit of time to continue the learning and the idea generating from Sherri's talk. And we would like to invite you to share what's come up for you from her talk, especially based on the questions that we posed. But you're welcome to share whatever else has been coming up for you too. And Sonia is going to scribe, and she's also sharing that slide here. And what we'd like to invite you to do, oh, sorry, I'm going to pause for a minute and introduce myself. My name is Lily Jacobson. I am another member of 350Vermont Staff Collective. I am joining from my apartment in Burlington, and I use she, her pronouns. So we would like to invite you to either put an asterisk in the chat to indicate that you would like to share verbally, and then we'll call on you. Or you're welcome to share any thoughts written in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. Yeah, whenever you're ready, feel free to put an asterisk in the chat or share your thought in the chat. And actually, during the break, one comment went in already. It says, in our group, we were talking about the Alaskan oil and gas lease sale in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. There's still time to oppose this by writing a letter to Chad Padgett, BLM, Alaska. And in the chat, there's the contact info. Marisa has the first comment. Go ahead, Marisa. You might need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry. One of the things our group talked about was what our barriers were to a more communal lifestyle. And so a couple of the things were that it's like issues of cleanliness and order and quiet and kind of being able to control your environment. Also, being able to take care of your place. Issues of like doing things by committee and having them not be done well, or having there not be enough resources to do things well. A lack of privacy, issues of trust, and finding like-minded people, or also one of the big things for me is just the challenge of overcoming individuality culture, and the lack of resources we are given in terms of how to live communally. Like we're not brought up with familiar community tending practices that we can fall back on in times of tension. So that was just the beginning of the conversation, but I wanted to share.
Thank you, Marisa. And actually how we wanted to start this conversation was allowing a little while for anyone to just share initial thoughts before your own, just what came up for you listening to Sherri and what you talked about in your groups before responding to things that people say in this discussion, but we will allow space for that too. Marcy offered, I like how Sherri considered othering as the real original sin. Annie has suggested that, shared that in her group, they talked about the importance of taking leadership from Indigenous people, especially locally and regionally. Marcy named that rushing and lack of time and consideration often get in the way of making the change we need, I think. Izzy wanted to add that some people might not be safe amongst their neighbors, for instance, from racism and homophobia. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for starting to share these thoughts. What else came up for you all from Sherri's talk and in your group conversations? Brian has offered, early in the pandemic, we saw increased appreciation of the caring economy and its unacknowledged essential workers. How can we sustain and strengthen that? For shares in our group, it came up that colonization is an ongoing process that manifests in institutions like government and nonprofits that have not shaken off the legacy of colonialism. We need to build decolonized institutions where soil, to use Sherri's expression, is not polluted. No good fruit can come out of colonized soil. Now, Ned offers the question of how to build trust, community, mutuality, and how to live, how to be accountable to all in an Indigenous way. Marcy highlights that term Sherri used, the leaderful movement, and how starlings show how a way that can be done is what we need post-COVID. Yeah, so lots of important themes that people are naming here that have been getting in the way of creating the kind of culture we need. Abby just shared how at 350 Vermont, we also like to talk about the leaderful movement, and how Adrienne Mary Brown also talks about starlings.
Sorry, it kept changing her name in my autocorrect.
Lots more comments coming in. Thank you. And I'm happy to keep reading them, and I'm going to. And I also do want to invite people also to put in an asterisk and to share comments verbally too, so that you're not just listening to me for 20 minutes. Sophia shared that in their group, they discussed how we can learn to truly listen and build reciprocity and understanding with those we disagree with. Can we offer mutual aid and a language of unity to those who don't currently get it? A question to flag for the next part of the conversation, asking FIRE for an example of a decolonized institution. See each other as people, they're sacred, not objects. All right, a discussion about how a sharing economy might differ from our present idea that there are some people, like those who spend a lot of time in education, whose time is considered more valuable, but this hinges upon education being so costly. And then starting to specifically address the question of what a maternal economy might look like. A maternal economy might have structures like community gardens, community solar, regional food systems. And then answering the question about decolonization in our organizing. Part of decolonizing is focusing on transformational versus transactional work, but transformational work requires us to slow down, and slowing down in the middle of a crisis is hard. Here. Land stewardship ownership being transferred to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Lots of ideas coming in about what a maternal economy might look like universal basic income, universal healthcare and housing, not having productivity be a prerequisite for survival. That's one I've been thinking about a lot. Advocating for livable wages, adequate housing, and land access. How decolonization, I think we want to make sure not to duplicate the violence that's associated with decolonization. It sounds like a lot of people are getting are finding that digging more deeply into what decolonization means would be useful. All right, I would like to invite us now. Thank you for sharing all of these initial thoughts. If you have heard something or read something in the chat so far, yes, heard something in this discussion so far that you would like to respond to, a question or just a comment you'd like to follow up on, I'd like to invite that part to start now. We can't talk about decolonization without talking about decapitalization and addressing alternative structures of economy. Colonization was driven by capitalism. economy emerging as a pretty central theme. People offering some helpful resources. Thank you. We will make sure to share those in notes that you'll have access to after this. We need to be honest and admit that we cannot have unlimited growth on a finite planet. One group talked about spending time with children in the woods and in gardens to encourage their appreciation of other species. And more on capitalism. Capitalism driven by trauma, insatiability as a symptom of suffering. Some deep stuff coming out. Did any groups have any insights about how can we address the illusion of separation that Sherri speaks about in our climate organizing? Love to hear any thoughts that came up about that. It is important that we act without guilting or shaming others and being humbly grateful. Gratitude is a powerful thing. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about that as well, like recognizing climate crisis as a issue that affects all of us, regardless of where we lie on the political spectrum, whether that's far left, far right, or somewhere in the middle, and that we all have some universal human needs and emotions behind whatever what our beliefs are. And I think for me, that's what comes up when we talk about the illusion of separation, and that we need to hold with empathy everyone's position where they are. And I think Bob and Becky stated it well, without guilt or shaming others.
Thank you, Alex. Another comment, the opposite of the illusion of separation, remembering ourselves into the web of life, all beings seen and unseen, ceremony, councils, practical and spiritual co-creative work. Thank you, friend. Another thought from Tara about capitalism. Capitalism is driven also by a scarcity mindset. The suffering caused by all these systems is so interconnected. That's why we need not be in silos in our movements. We have time for just a few more comments, or if people have any more questions coming up, now's the time to share those last ones. The beautiful understanding of how forests are interconnected is powerful, and understanding how these beings that we thought of as inert or without feelings, like trees, helps us re-understand interconnection. Learning from forests. Storytelling to break down illusions of separation. Yeah. As you might be noticing, if you are particularly appreciating something that someone is saying, you can put pluses in the chat with their name to let them know you agree or appreciate what they said. On separation, honoring the microbial essential workers that are responsible for life on this planet. Yeah. And starting with how our own bodies teach us abundance, producing fertilizer every day. Yeah. Much of the food system in this country and the world has involved corporations land grabbing from indigenous people who then end up having to work for those corporations because they don't have land to grow their own food in ways that their ancestors did. We could support the groups who are trying to restart their own foodways. Yes, and there's some beautiful examples of that happening now.
Jessica put her hand up, Lily.
Oh, thank you. I did not see that. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, this isn't something we talked about in the group, but the thought came to me listening to people's comments here. So it's the idea of this maternal economy. What I got most from it was that those who have enough are giving to others to make sure that they have enough. And I can see how that can work within a small community, right? Like a commune or a family or a small village. And I guess this is more of a question. It's that how does that work on a larger scale? One way is tax the rich, right? Or is it more that we are providing this example by making these communal societies and having other people see them and want to live like that as well? Are we using a carrot or a stick? That's kind of what I was thinking about.
Yeah, such important questions. Thank you, Jessica. There are some more good comments in the chat that I want to invite you to read. And one last comment from Earl, who has his hand up. Earl, you might need to unmute.
Sorry about that, I forgot. I'm from Oklahoma. I'm Cherokee, Shawnee, and Algonquin and Mi'kmaq First Nations. I live in Quechee. I live in both places. In Cherokee Nation, we have a society called Gadugi Society, and it is an ancient society that we had before we were forced to move to Oklahoma from our ancient homelands in the southeast. And the Gadugi Society that I'm a part of as a water keeper where I live in Oklahoma, Gadugi Society is a society that of people within a community, a Cherokee community, that goes to help people in need. Elders that need food, need their homes repaired, need help with their garden, any other needs, people who are sick, whatever the situation, the Gadugi Society goes to them and helps them. And so whether it's in the village or wherever the setting within the Cherokee Nation, the Gadugi Society is there to go and help them. And we're a matriarchal society, Cherokees, and the other tribes that I have heritage with, most all are matriarchal societies and have an equivalent of the Gadugi Society. And this is a good model, whether you live in a city, you live in a rural area, in a village or a small town. This is a really good model where young people and others who have the time can you know, gather together and then go throughout the area, you know, helping people, repairing their homes, providing food, whatever is the need. And without living communally, they live communally as a community. And that's what the tribe was like. We lived in villages all over our area, independent villages with our own chiefs, our own council, our own clans were within those villages. They made their own decisions separately, each village throughout the Smoky Mountains, but each had a Gadugi society. And so there's no difference now with the cities all over Vermont, for example. If it was a Cherokee society, there'd be Gadugi societies throughout all these towns and roaming between towns, helping people. And that's a matriarchal society, and that's how they behaved.
Thank you so much for sharing about that, Earl. Really appreciate hearing.
And they still do that today. And I live in the Cherokee Nation there. When I'm in Oklahoma, that's where our farm is, and that's how it is.
That's awesome to learn about. Thank you so much. And thank you all for sharing your thoughts. What rich things for us to keep learning about. We're going to shift now to the next part of the convergence, and just before we dive into this next part, I want to invite us to take a couple deep breaths, just keep breathing in, absorbing all that we have been considering and learning.
Hey there, this is Julie again from the Staff Collective. I'm going to tell you about all the rad things we've been up to since the last time we gathered, which the last convergence we had was 2018, actually. You would think that the pandemic had slowed us down, but we've been really, really busy. Last year saw us climate striking, blockading coal trains, stopping transmission lines, passing more climate resolutions, training of hundreds of activists, and a lot more. And as we figured out how to function as a staff collective when Maeve McBride stepped down as executive director last year, a global pandemic stopped in-person gatherings. But we continued to find ways to keep fossil fuels in the ground, sequester carbon, and act in solidarity with other movements and lots of other things. Next slide. In terms of fossil fuel resistance, at the end of 2019, again, we were really busy with no coal, no gas blockading trains that were carrying 10,000 tons of coal to the last coal facility in the region. And then by March, we were huddled in our respective homes, preventing the spread of COVID-19. But we didn't let that hinder our efforts. We successfully worked in collaborations with our friends in Rutland and Moncton to prevent Vermont Gas from building any new infrastructure, including a gate station and 35 miles of fracked gas lines that were potentially going to go between Middlebury and Rutland. You can see the picture from the climate walk last year is us going along the line in Moncton down in the left corner. And then across the continent earlier this year, we got to celebrate so many pipeline wins with amazing feats of resistance that I'm just going to list them off for brevity's sake. Atlantic Coast, Dakota Access, Keystone XL, Coastal GasLink, Lebanon Hanover, and Granite Bridge all had some kind of work stoppage or some wrench in the work or straight up got canceled. And to support storytelling from folks across the region that were part of these kinds of efforts and acting in solidarity with Indigenous leadership to halt gas, oil, and coal, we hosted a virtual storytelling day with tales of fossil fuel resistance during Earth Week, when things suddenly had to go digital. Next slide. I wanted to real quick put in another plug for the folks who are standing against Line 3 right now. Would be one of the largest crude oil pipelines in the world, carrying close to 1 million barrels of crude oil per day, impacting lots of indigenous land. I'm going to drop in the chat the link for frontline support, again, from our friends at 350 Minnesota. So just throwing that in there before we move on. Next slide. So again, we're celebrating Earth Day online for our first ever virtual week of action. For our climate solutions program, we hosted a series of virtual gardening and regenerative ag panels, which have continued through the fall and have been fairly popular. We also dug into one of our newest projects, Rewild Vermont, a campaign to plant 100,000 native trees in 2 years, including fruit and nut trees, to address food insecurity and sequester carbon. So far, 1,285 trees have been planted. We also took our movement back to the State House to push for the strongest language we could for legislation like the Global Warming Solutions Act, and worked with senators to push for a Green New Deal fund, which would tax up to 5%, would tax the top 5% of earners in Vermont and redistribute that wealth by funding climate solutions like public transit and weatherization. Next slide. Mother Up has continued to provide us space and opportunities for kids, parents, and families to engage with the climate justice movement. Just before the pandemic, when we were able to do some grassroots lobbying for the Green New Deal Fund and a ban on any new large-scale fossil fuel infrastructure during our annual lobby day. Families have been gathering monthly online using social distancing measures in Brattleboro and Montpelier, and lately they've done a ton of work getting out the vote with postcards to Georgia and engaging in Rewild Vermont tree plantings. They've also been standing up for racial justice during Solidarity Fridays in Brattleboro Node. So lots of little adorable kiddos doing some really radical stuff. Next slide. And speaking of acting in solidarity, we went big with all of our solidarity asks this year. We've been involved with dozens of actions around racial justice, Indigenous sovereignty, immigrant rights, youth organizing, and Protect the Results campaigns around the election. We started off the year supporting migrant justice and community voices for immigrant rights for the successful passage of No Mas Polymigra, which strengthens the fair and impartial policing policy in Burlington, which closed loopholes that made it so the police could collaborate with ICE. In February, we hosted a number of solidarity actions for the Wet'suwet'en land protectors in so-called British Columbia, who are facing the Coastal GasLink pipeline. The movement they built down in Canada shut down Canada's railways for a number of weeks. It was really impressive. They stopped about 400 trains and shut down the economy. Shortly after, as the pandemic surged in the States, we worked with communities we serve to bolster mutual aid efforts for vulnerable community members and worked in our communities to defund and hold the police accountable. We need to keep showing up for all of these other movements because they're inextricably tied to our movement for climate justice. Next slide. And in addition to being part of all of this solidarity work in the rest of our program areas, our local nodes and writing groups have been really, really busy. Across Vermont, we engaged with actions to hold police accountable once again, particularly against Black folks in the wake of George Floyd's murder, just one of the many people who have been brutally killed by police this year. Nodes also worked on a ton of get out the vote efforts, mailing postcards, making songs about the governor's inaction on climate. You should check out Lissa's song at some point, it's amazing. And hosting socially distant DOTV themed critical mass bike rides. Back on the internet, our friends down in Rutland County Node have been hosting awesome series on composting to complement the solutions campaign work. And our writing group published 2 amazing new zines full of original poetry, prose, and artwork that highlight the connections between COVID and the climate crisis. Next slide. And on top of all of that, we did a ton of trainings. Trainings and workshops have been really popular and more accessible than ever as we've had to overhaul curriculum to fit to online platforms like the Zoom call we're all on right now. We've hosted over 800 people at events and trainings on topics like climate justice leadership, how racial justice and climate justice are connected, and nonviolent direct action. We've actually offered 16 new workshops on topics like the connection between food justice and climate justice, organizing during the pandemic, working with youth, and centering racial justice in climate justice organizing. We're still giving lots of nonviolent direct action trainings and workshops on what we wanted to do after the election on November 4th. We launched a new working group with other groups like in the 350.org network to grow justice, equity, diversity in the national climate movement. We brought on our first 2 youth board members, and we completed our first new and still evolving, we've completed our first year as a new and still evolving staff structure with more deeply shared leadership, including a staff collective and 3 new board and staff committees. And I will hand it over to Danielle from the board to talk a little bit more about that.
That's right. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Danielle. I am co-chair of the 350 Vermont board. And just a quick update on all of the internal work that 350 Vermont has been doing over the last 14 months, as if all of the things Julie said weren't enough. We've also been going through a transition from our amazing outgoing executive director, Maeve, to a staff collective model of nonprofit leadership, with each of the staff members taking more ownership of the organization's work as co-directors or collective members. We've been working with a consultant, Claire Wheeler, to reorganize internally and redistribute duties within the organization. The staff have identified realms of internal and external facing work at the organization and developed a work plan for 2 staff members to take the lead in each area so that we have more shared accountability and more decentralized workload. The transition also split up the duties that typically fall under the executive director's role among the whole collective. So the hope is this will be a more sustainable approach to organizational health. And on the board side, we're collaborating closely with the staff collective through board staff committees that meet monthly in the realms of finance and fundraising, which covers our financials and fundraising appeals, organizing, which covers all of our direct action campaigns and also includes some more members in an advisory capacity, and organizational health, which covers the internal work of assessing the collective needs. The board members on that committee are also collectively hold the board chair's traditional duties as co-chairs. So our board structure is beginning to reflect the new organization structure. So for a lot of you, what this means is that your main point of contact at 350 Vermont is not one executive director who, you know, has limited time and may be volunteering hours outside of their normal duties, but it is going to be 2 staff collective members who are in charge of that realm. So we're decentralizing, and it, you know, it reflects our values as creating a leaderful movement where, you know, more people can step up in all of those areas rather than everyone having to go to the executive director. So staff collective members can always direct you to the person responsible for the realm that you're asking about. So you can always just ask them. Would staff members like to add anything else about the internal stuff?
I think that was a great high overview. Thank you so much, Danielle. Joy, did you have anything else to add?
No, I've already spoken enough, I think.
Can I add one last thing that's on this final slide? Besides all of us on the staff collective being cute at our last in-person staff meeting for the year, probably now that it's cold. We just that the kind of pink square about how do we want to organize. We've been doing a lot of reflecting as a staff and as a board and talking with node leaders about what is 350 Vermont's niche and what should we really be working on. And we're still in an ongoing conversation and we're still going to be asking more people for input. But these kind of A through G list are the things that we think that we have done well and that are really important to us. So this is kind of the beginning of our framing of like, here's what we do really well, and here's how we act in all parts of our organization.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time today to spend with us. My name is I am another member of the staff collective and an organizer I live in Worcester, Vermont. I'm also an organic vegetable grower. So you just got kind of a whirlwind report about what we've been up to for the past year. And we want to take some time reflecting on our work. Our work isn't possible without all of you. You're such a vital part of what we do. And we value relationships in our work. And so what you think and how you feel about this work is really important. So we want to take 10 minutes. We're going to put you into groups to just reflect on your experience with 350 Vermont. You might have been involved with the organization for a long time. You may be a node member, and you might be involved in all the things that we're doing. And so the questions we're asking you to think about is, what do you think 350 Vermont has done well at? And what would you like to see us grow into and do more of? So we're going to break you into groups. You can sit and take a few minutes to sit and think about that by yourself and then discuss it with the other participants. And then we're going to bring you all back together and we're going to do a little exercise where people can write down what they came up with. Hi, I'm going to share a link in the chat. And this is to a Jamboard. And we're going to now harvest all your thoughts. So if you want to open the link, to the left of the screen, there is a little notepad that's our little icon that looks like a sticky note. So you can click on that and then a screen will pop up that says sticky note, and you can type your answers to the first question, which is, what do you think 350 Vermont has done well in 2020 in general? And then up at the top, you can click the little arrow and go to the second page where the second question is, and you can fill in a sticky note. Click on the sticky note icon and type in your answer there. Is everyone clear on that? Has everyone been able to open it up? No. Do you see Annie, do you see the link?
No, I don't.
In the chat? Okay, I'm gonna put it in there again.
Got it. Okay. Yes, I see it. Thank you. I just missed the first part of that, I think.
Oh yeah, so I think some people might have been coming back in. So if you want to open up the Jamboard, and then you can type your comments into there.
And for those of you who can't or don't want to access the Jamboard, I'm now sharing my screen. So don't get confused if you try and type in the shared screen in Zoom, it won't work. But feel free to type your answer in the chat and Abby will just scribe it into the Jamboard.
And so the first page is the first question, and then the second page is for the second question.
How do we move to the second question?
Up at the top, there's an arrow. It says 1/2 at the top of the page, and you push the arrow on the right.
Sonia, maybe you could show where the arrow is.
Oh, I can. Hold on.
With your cursor.
You see my cursor? I can also...
Right up here.
Do you want to be host, Sonia?
No. Here. It looks like there might be a limit for how many people can be accessing this at one time. So for those of you who aren't able to get into the document, feel free to just put things into the chat and we will Abby's going to copy and paste them into the doc.
So some of the things to the first question, what would you like, or sorry, this first question is, what do you think 350 has done well in 2020 and in general? Racial justice and climate justice training was great, empowering people and leadership skills. Our group was really energized by the big events and rallies. Culture of justice and not just technological solutions. Creating a convergence that feels personal, constructive, and connective.
I love that someone wrote survived beyond Maeve. Us too. Us too. We're proud of that.
Rewild Vermont. People are encouraged to bring their skills and gifts and choose how to engage. Modeling the collaborative, cooperative ways we want to see in the world through the staff collective. And then on the second page, what would you like us to grow into, do more of? Build partnerships with other climate justice organizations in the region. Growing work at local level. Getting carbon out of the atmosphere as well as reducing emissions. Increase the amount of direct action the organization participates in and or leads. Strengthen leadership and connections between nodes. That's a good suggestion.
And feel free to answer the second question in the chat as well. And we'll make sure all of these get into the slides before they get sent out.
Work with working people and labor organizations more closely. Grow more leaders who can start more nodes and grow our super node power. When we can meet in person, direct actions as a group, such as the walk from Middlebury to Montpelier. The other thing that came up is being more inclusive with other groups so that there is more diversity. Increase the amount of direct action the organization participates in and or leads. Build part, oh, I think I read that one. I would like to see efforts to have inclusive conversations with people who have different opinions. So working more with and learning how to talk to people who think differently than we might. Alliances with religious, spiritual groups, organizations. All of these are really great suggestions. Be an anchor incubator for local grassroots initiatives, support nodes.
Also, Jael, I'm not always sure if sometimes I think people are putting them in the chat, but they're already in the Jamboard, so there may be some repeats, but
okay.
I'm just trying to keep up.
Help Vermont become a Green New Deal leader.
And if we've missed getting any into the Jamboard during this, we'll make sure to capture them from the chat after, because this feedback is really important for us.
Yes. Yeah, so we will, I'm sure, be sharing out a lot of this with all of you.
And if you have other feedback for us on staff or for our board, this is not your only opportunity to talk to us. We'll be sending out a follow-up email. You should feel free to reach out to us if you want to have more of a conversation at any time about. We are always open to input and feedback, and we really appreciate taking a few minutes to give it to us right now.
Great, I'll read one or two more, and then I think I'll pass it back on off to Lily. So one thing that people felt like we've done well at is relationship building. I have to agree with that one. I love all the relationships I've built in my work with 350 Vermont. And advocate for our policies to the Climate Council and legislator. So thank you everyone for taking the time to reflect on our work. It's very helpful. And thank you for typing in all these great suggestions. And I feel very seen and appreciated by all your comments.
And we're gonna continue with our closing. And I'd like to invite one of our fall interns from this semester, Kaylin O'Leary, to share some parting words.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaylin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a mobilization intern this semester with 350 Vermont. And as a closing, I'd like to read a poem by Bell Hooks called Appalachian Elegy. Hear them cry, the long dead, the long gone, speak to us. From beyond the grade, guide us, that we may learn all the ways to hold tender this land, hard clay, direct rock upon rock, charred earth. In time, strong green growth will rise here. Trees back to life, native flowers pushing the fragrance of hope, the promise of resurrection. Such then is beauty surrendered against all hope. You are here again, turning slowly, nature as chameleon, all life change and changing again, awakening hearts, steady moving from unnamed loss into fierce, deep grief that can bear all burdens, even the long passage into a shadowy dark where no light enters. Night moves through the thick dark, a heavy silence outside near the front window. A black bear stamps down plants, pushing back brush, fleeing man-made confinement, roaming unfettered, confident. Any place can become home, strutting down a steep hill as though freedom is all, in the now, no past, no present. Earthworks, thick brown mud, clinging, pulling a body down, heard wounded earth cry, bequeathed to me, the hope, ancestral rights, to turn the ground over, to shovel and sift, until history rewritten, resurrected, returns to its rightful owners, a path to claim, yet another stone lifted to throw against the enemy, making way for new endings. Random seeds spreading over the hillside, wild roses come by fierce wind and hard rain. Unleashes furies, here in this touched wood, a dirge, a lamentation for earth to live again. Earth that is all at once a grave, a resting place, a bed of new beginnings, avalanche of splendor. Small horses ride me, carry my dreams of prairies and frontiers, where once the first people roamed, claimed union with the earth, no right to own or possess, no sense of territory, all boundaries placed by unseen ones. Here I will give you thunder, shatter your hearts with rain, let snow soothe you, make your healing water clear, sweet, a sacred spring where the thirsty may drink, animals all. Listen, little sister, angels make their hope here. In these hills, follow me. I will guide you. Careful now. No trespass. I will guide you. Word for word, mouth for mouth, all the holy ones embracing us, all of our kin, making home here. Renegade, marooned, lawless fugitives grace these mountains. We have earth to bind us. The covenant between us can never be broken. Vows to live and let live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. What a perfect poem. And now we would like to invite our board member, Andrea Stander, to say a few words.
Thanks, Lily. Hi, everybody. I'm sure everyone is getting a little bit at the end of what someone told me that meetings should only last for as long as the butt can endure. So I'm sure we're hitting the outer limits of that at this point. But I'm Andrea Stander. I live in Montpelier. I have been on the board for about 1.5 years, and one of my roles on the board is to sort of lead up the fundraising efforts. As you all know, 350 is a nonprofit organization, and we are independent from the national organization. One of the issues that we've dealt with a lot is confusion over when you give to 350. Are you giving to Vermont or are you giving to the national organization? And unless you're giving to 350 Vermont, 350 VT, those resources are not coming to us. So make sure you know that, and anybody else who might be interested knows that. And I'm going to keep this really short. We need your support. We need your financial support. We need all your support, grassroots organizing and activism and so on. And I know this is a difficult time for most of us to deal with figuring out where can we put our limited resources. So I guess I'll just say what I do, which is I try to support those things that speak to the values that I care about the most. So I do support the food bank, and I support my local homeless shelter, and I support some arts organizations because I can't live without them. But I do feel in terms of climate work in Vermont right now, supporting 350 is probably one of the best investments you can make. And just to put a finer point on it, if you are able to support us financially, and any amount is going to be valuable to us. You're going to help us deepen our intersectionality and justice work. You're going to help us grow more meaningful connections and support the heart of our movement, which is our local and statewide grassroots organizing. All of you are part of that, and that's what we want to be able to continue to support. And to also expand our ability to collaborate with young people and support youth leadership in the climate movement. This is so much about the future of the younger generation. And speaking as part of the older generation, I feel a deep responsibility to provide whatever resources we can to help young climate leaders take the forefront of this effort. So, and I'll give one last pitch for what I do, which is I'm a monthly giver to 350 Vermont. It's a small amount, but it's really helpful to the organization to have that regular income stream coming into the organization. So I'll just ask everyone to consider what you might contribute, either as a one-time gift or becoming a monthly donor, or even just encouraging someone else you know who may be looking for a way to support the climate movement to consider supporting 350 Vermont. So thanks, everybody, and thanks for all the work you're doing, wherever and however you're doing it. It's all so very, very important.
And the easiest way to donate is?
Sorry, I blew my responsibility. The easiest way to donate is to go to our website, 350vt.org. There's a big old donate button right up there on the right-hand side. We're in the middle of our end of year campaign, like a lot of other nonprofits, but you can also mail a check directly to us. If you don't want to do the credit card thing and you don't want to do the online thing, on that page, it tells you exactly where to send your check. And if you're interested in doing monthly donations, there's information about how to do that as well. So thank you, Melody, for reminding me to do the important part.
Yes, crowdsourced sharing of the key information here. Thank you so much, Andrea and Melody. And with that, we would like to transition into sharing some gratitude. Sonia, could you share the slide? Awesome, thank you. So to start with, thank you to some of the organizations that have helped make today possible. Thank you particularly to our presenting sponsor for 2020, Seventh Generation. Thank you to Champlain Orchards, who have been a long time sponsor through proceeds from one of their ciders. If you drink their mac and maple cider, that gets a little bit of a donation to 350Vermont. And many organizations helped with outreach to get you all here today. Maybe it was from one of these organizations that you even found out about today. So thank you so much to these organizations. And if your organization helped with publicity for today and your name isn't on here, could you please put your name in the chat, because we don't want to miss you. Next slide, please. So 350Vermont is part of a big movement for change, and we're connected with so many different organizations. On your registration form, we asked you what other organizations you're affiliated with, and you all collectively mentioned about 150 organizations of a whole lot of different kinds. And so we just wanted to share who the organizations are who were represented by people's presence here today. I was pretty blown away by that list. So thank you. And then the last slide, please. Then we wanted to thank some of the people who are doing this work. 350Vermont's board of directors is so invaluable in this work, and especially in the past year, they've really stepped up to a new level of sharing the leadership of this organization and of so much of this movement in Vermont, and we're really grateful. This work is supported on a daily basis by our staff. Mostly today you've been hearing from the staff collective, but a huge thanks to our operations manager, Sophia, and to our Mother Up organizer in Montpelier, Heather. And then, of course, it is volunteers around the state and a little bit even beyond who do the local organizing that really makes up this organization. We want to thank our current interns, Kayla, Joe, and also so many interns from the past. Where would we be without the nodes and the node leaders and the many members of each node? Thanks to the families in the Mother Up groups around the state. Thanks this year to our fabulous Zine team and writing group. Thank you to the people who have been involved in our campaigns in a variety of different ways, some involved in nodes and other groups, and some not. And then we work with so many people who help to move our campaigns or just we collaborate with in all these different ways who may not identify with 350 Vermont as their primary organizing home, but who play such a huge role in the work that we do. And thank you to all of those folks. And we would like to sincerely thank all of you for spending your afternoon with us. I think we can end this slide now. It would be nice to be able to see people's faces again. Thank you. Coming together and thinking about the big stuff and the deep stuff and figuring out what we're going to do together is such a central part of having a movement and having an organization, and it's asking a lot. And we're really grateful for your presence and for all the different ways that you engage in changing the world. And to say, oh, one more thing to share. We would like to invite you to give us some feedback on today. We always like to know what you liked, what you'd like to see differently in the future. So please, if you can, take a minute to let us know what you thought about today in that evaluation link. And to part ways, we'd like to do one big unmuted goodbye. So I'd like to invite you to unmute now. And then I'm going to count down from 3. And after we reach 1, in whatever word or words you choose, I'd just like to invite us all to say goodbye at once. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bless you all. Thank you.
Good connection.
See you.
Blessings.
Great gathering.
Really excellent meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, blessings.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Good to see all your faces.